Hello everyone, Chris Whitten here. Glad to be back with you again today. So for today's video, I want to talk about a really good friend of mine. He's no longer with us. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2017. But there's a reason that I want to talk about him today. You know, they actually started making a documentary about my friend close to 20 years ago. It's taken quite a while to put it all together and get it funded and everything, but I just heard a few days ago that the film is completed and it will be debuting at the Dallas International Film Festival here in just a few weeks. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to talk a little bit about my friend Ben Lovey Dorcy. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So Ben was born on May 19th, 1925. He skated in the ice capades in the early 1940s, I believe from around 1940 to 43, whenever he went into the Navy during World War II. He served with honor on a vessel in the South Pacific. I don't know many details, but he did tell me that their ship was hit by a kamikaze and his knee was injured when that occurred. So, and he had trouble with that knee from time to time over the years, especially when the weather would get cold or wet or nasty. But after he returned from World War II, he had been working, I think he had several jobs, but around 1950 he was working as what they then called a band boy. He was working at John T. Floor's Country Store in Helotes on the west side of San Antonio. And back then, you know, anymore people talk about roadies, somebody who loads gear and helps the artists and the bands and the musicians. Back then, people like that, they were known as band boys, and they didn't go on the road. They were generally employed by the venues to help take care of the musicians when they got there. Well, Ben was the first band boy to actually go on the road, and hence he was the first man to be referred to as a roadie. Ben worked for Hank Thompson from 1950 till about 1953, and after that time he floated around a little bit, ended up out in California working as a delivery boy for Nudie Cone, the famous tailor to the stars, made the famous Nudie suits with all the rhinestones and everything. And so it was around 1960 when he was working for Nudie that he met John Wayne. And John was looking for a gardener at the time, and as Lovey had told me, he said John hired him and gave him a place to stay. He had a bedroom in the Duke's house, and he said that he would kind of tend the garden and all of that. Well, after 6 or 8 months of that, he said that John actually hired a gardener, a real gardener, somebody knew what they were doing, I guess you could say. And Ben thought that that was the end of his tenure, so he went in his bedroom, he got his suitcase out, started packing his stuff, and he said the Duke walked in and said, "Ben, what are you doing?" And Lovey said, "Well, you hired a gardener, so I figured it was time for me to move on." John looked at him and said, "Ben, I hired a gardener. That didn't mean I was firing you." He said, "I want you to be my chauffeur." I believe he worked with John Wayne until about 1965. He was in a number of John Wayne's movies. I believe the first movie that he was a part of was actually the movie The Alamo that came out in 1960. But he had a lot of great mementos and stuff from that time. But then after that, he moved back to Nashville. He had met Willie, having worked with Ray Price a little bit back in the 1950s after he left Hank Thompson. And when he got back to Nashville, he and Willie reconnected, and at that point, Ben worked for Johnny Cash and later Chris Christopherson, Waylon Jennings. But he and Willie were great friends, and they actually both worked for Ray Price together at the same time, somewhere in there. The thing with Lovey, the timelines can be a bit foggy, so it was hard to get straight answer out of him on some things. But anyway, of course, he moved back to Austin when Willie moved back to Austin and started playing music, and he lived in one of the condos there behind the studio there at Pedernales or Briarcliff out by Spicewood, just west of Austin on Willie's golf course. So when I moved to Austin, I lived out there as well, so he was actually my neighbor. But at that point in time, He was about, I believe, 75, 76 years old, somewhere in there. He could be kind of hard to deal with, so I think just kind of as a favor to Willie, my boss, Kevin Fowler, had started taking him out on the road every weekend. Of course, here and there, whenever Willie was, playing shows nearby, kind of the Texas, Oklahoma, kind of a regional area, of course, Ben would go out on the road with him for those short runs and short weekends. But for the most part there, for about 3 or 4 years, Ben traveled with us. So spent a lot of time with him. But he was a character. Anybody that ever met him will tell you, a lot of people didn't really understand him. And I feel that I was very fortunate that I did come to understand him. Like I said, I first met him when I went to work for Kevin. I met him at the bus yard. We were loading up to go out on the road. And I remember looking at him and thinking, this man is supposed to be a roadie. He's supposed to be loading gear, and we're sitting in the front lounge going down the road, and he's over there napping. Doesn't look like he could carry anything. And boy, was I surprised. We got to the venue, and by the time I could put my shoes on and walk off the bus, Ben had already flown out the door and taken about 3 loads of stuff up to the stage. He was on point. He was a force to be reckoned with when it came to working a stage and working a show, just making sure everybody was taken care of. He was always on top of things. But, as I said, everybody referred to him as Lovey because he would call everybody else Lovey or Love. A lot of guys would kind of have this banter with him because whenever you'd see him, he'd be like, Love, how's your monkey? And he had all these sayings and stuff. And when he would do that, if you reciprocated and you talked back to him in a similar fashion, he would just go into character. And I figured out real quick also, whenever he went into character like that, he was, I think, being what he thought you expected him to be. I also think that he let people underestimate him. People thought he was just kind of a kooky old man. In reality, he was dumb like a fox, and he would play that to his advantage. He really would. Early on, I hadn't been with Kevin very long. We were playing a show out in Lubbock. I'll never forget this. We had to be somewhere like Houston or somewhere like that, all the way across the state, fairly early the next day. So we had talked about it before the show and decided we'd have no guests on the bus because we had to get loaded and get out of there as quickly as possible. Well, that night, after the show was over with, Kevin was at the merch table signing autographs and so forth. We had gotten everything loaded off the stage, so me and another guy walked up there to the merch table to see how close they were to being done so we could help get the merch loaded out quickly whenever they got it packed up. So when I walked up, our road manager, Darren, was standing there, and he said, well, it's going to be a few minutes. At that point, Kevin had already gone to the bus. They were just starting to pack the merchandise up, which would take probably 20 or 30 minutes. So as we're standing there talking, 2 young ladies, they had bought, between the two of them, probably close to $100 worth of merchandise. They had been waiting for the crowd to thin out so that they could get their stuff signed. They didn't really want to stand in line, I guess, but they had gone to the restroom. And by the time they come back, Kevin had left to go to the bus, so they didn't get to talk to him or have their stuff signed. So we started talking to him. They asked us where he was at, and we said, well, he already went to the bus and everything. And they were really disappointed. So I stepped over to our road manager, Darren. I said, Darren, they bought quite a bit of merch, and they were wanting Kevin to sign it and wanted to take a picture with him. Do we have time? Do you think it'd be all right if I just took him out the bus and got Kevin to sign their stuff and talk to him for a minute? And he said, yeah, we're just going to be at least 20 minutes or so before we can start loading out. So, yeah, go ahead and take him out there. So me and the other guy in the band, we walked him out to the bus, and just as we were coming in the door, Ben was coming out of the bunk area, coming towards us. And as soon as he saw those 2 girls' heads pop up, he said, no guests on the bus, no guests on the bus. We got to go, we got to go. And I said, Ben, it's okay. I talked to Darren. There's no guests on the bus. He kept cutting me off, getting mad. And he just did like that, pushed us out of the way, pushed past us, and off the bus he went. I looked at the other guy, said, well, you go ahead and take him back there. Let me go find Darren and let him know that Ben's on the warpath. So I headed off the bus, and by the time I got in the venue and found Darren, I said, Lovey's mad. And he goes, oh, I know. He already found me. He said, and he's mad at me too because I told him that y'all talked to me, and I told y'all to take him out there. So now he's mad at me too because he keeps saying, we've got to get out of here. We've got to get out of here. Well, anyhow, I think that in that moment, Ben thought that we were trying to cat around and what have you. I don't think he realized we were just genuinely trying to get these girls merchandise signed and everything, and it wasn't a big deal. But it made him really mad. He got mad at me, and he didn't talk to me for about 2 weeks. And we were probably doing 3 or 4 shows a week, so it was a good 6, 7, 8 shows that we were on the road. We're living on this bus together. And he did not speak to me. The closest he came to speaking to me during that time is I needed a battery for my in-ear monitor pack, and we were at sound check, and I was looking around. I said, Ben, do you know where some batteries are? And he looked around the stage, and there was an old dead 9-volt battery laying on the stage, and he bent down and picked it up and goes, there, and turned around and walked off. So that was the only interaction I had with him for about 2 weeks. Well, finally, the 3rd week, I'm like, man, this is getting old. And in the meantime, I had talked to Willie's road manager, Pootie Locke, who was a real good friend of mine and a neighbor, and I told him about it, and I said, how can I get him to take me seriously, And also, he did not call me by my name. It was, hey, fiddle player. And, of course, the guitar player was, hey, guitar player, or hey, whatever instrument you played, that's what he called you by. But it never offended me because I thought, man, he's known every fiddle player that was worth knowing since in the history of music, basically. So I couldn't get offended by that. But Pootie told me, he said, Ben is not an idiot. And he said, don't get into that. He said, if you want him to take you seriously, don't call him Lovey, call him Ben. And just talk to him like normal. He said, a lot of these guys who get to bantering back and forth with him, and he goes into character, It's stuff that I'd already figured out about it. And he said, just be straightforward with him, and he'll respect you. We were leaving the venue one night, and I was sitting up front talking to our driver. I had trouble sleeping, and it was late, probably 3 or 4 in the morning. And oddly enough, Ben, for as much time as he had spent on the road, could not sleep worth a flip on the bus. So he was up and down typically all night, too. And I was sitting up there, and we're rolling along, probably 4 o'clock in the morning, and I heard the door to the bunk area open, and I looked back, and I saw him come out, and he stepped into the restroom, and I looked over at our bus driver, Billy, and I said, well, there's Ben. And when he came out of the bathroom, he came out and sat down on the couch. So I told Billy, I said, well, I'm going to go see if I can talk to him. So I went back there and sat down on the couch next to him, just the 2 of us, and I said, and of course I already knew the answer to this, but I was trying to open a line of communication with him. I said, Ben, wasn't John Wayne's real name Marion? And he sat there for a minute, kind of chuckled, and he goes, yep, sure was. And he said, boy, he hated his name. He said, I saw a gaffer one time. We walked on a set, and the gaffer goes, well, look, there's Marion Morrison. And said, John looked at him and said, you're fired. Get your stuff and get out of here. And he laughed a little bit. And I had seen a documentary about John Wayne not long before that, and I saw where he had had part of a lung taken out, and right before he filmed the movie Sons of Katie Elder, and I mentioned that to him. He said, yeah, I was on that movie. And he said, he filmed all those stunts himself, jumping out of the buckboard into the creek. And he said they had to do 5 or 6 takes of that. But Ben said he had a little oxygen tank on wheels and a big one inside of his dressing trailer. And Ben said, in between each take, he would just lay up in the mud there on the bank of that creek. And Ben would have to bring his oxygen so that he could just kind of catch his breath. He was still healing from the surgery. So we got to talking a little bit, and he pulled his wallet out. And his wallet was about as old as he was, and stuffed full of things, and he had a big rubber band around it, and it was about this big. He took the rubber band off and opened it up, and he had all sorts of stuff in there, like a badge where he was an honorary sheriff's deputy there for the city of San Antonio, and some stuff like that. But he thumbed around in there and pulled out a little laminated card and just handed it to me. And I looked at it, and it had the MGM Lions on it, and it was his lot pass, and it had a photograph of Ben on it. And it said, Ben Dorcy, John Wayne Valet. And I couldn't believe that he was still carrying it around in his wallet, which I'm sure had probably been in there since he worked for John. But while we were sitting there, we got to talking, and he told me a story that even at his funeral, and I talked to a lot of people that knew him well, who all said they had never heard this story. But he looked at me and he goes, I was married once. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah. He said, it's when I worked for John Wayne. He said, we were living on John's ranch out in Arizona, and he said, I married a young Native American girl, and she was pregnant, and we went to go film a movie. We were on set, and while I was gone, he said, a milk truck had run a four-way stop and T-boned her and killed her and the baby. And he told me, he said, I almost lost my mind after that. He said, and I chased women and all this stuff. He said, but you know something? None of it worth it. He said, if you can find a person who loves you and who you love, there's nothing better than that, than being in a committed relationship. And then at that point, he really made a lot more sense to me. I realized some of his kooky stuff was probably, trauma from that, trauma from World War II, all this stuff kind of mixed in together. But after that, we were golden. And it took him 4 years to actually call me by name, and I remember exactly where I was at when it happened, and it nearly made me want to cry. But I was so excited. Ben called me by my name, called me Chris. But he was quite a character, Just all the little things that come to mind with him. I remember one time we were loading in, we were playing, it was at the Galveston County Fair, and we had just gotten loaded in. They were getting the stage wired up. We were waiting on the sound guys, and I got off the stage and was walking around the back of the stage, walking over to the merch table. I met him coming around the corner of the stage, and he looked at me all excited, and he goes, Love, 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 I got to tell you something. Love, Love. And then he just stopped and gave me the just most blank, deadpan look. And then he said, what did you want? And I said, Ben, I don't know. This is your world. I'm just living in it. And he goes, oh, whatever, and stomped off like I had interrupted whatever he was doing. But just little funny things like that. But over the years, at that point in time, he wasn't what he later became. Like I said, he was on the road with us for quite a while and quite a few years there. And then at that point in time, people just thought he was weird. Well, a little later, some of the other young Texas music artists kind of got turned on to him and who he was. And at that point, they all started taking turns taking him out on the road. And at that point, he was in his 80s, and he would still help carry some stuff and help take care of things. But, he wasn't toting gear like he used to. And at that point, he kind of became a talisman for everyone, kind of almost like the Texas music mascot. And they also started doing a special tribute concert every year. I think they did it in February. They were doing it out at John T. Floor's Country Store in the Lotus, and declared it Ben Dorcy Day, and it was a lot of great stuff. But with regard to this documentary, it was filmed by one of Willie's family members, actually two of his family members. It's a nephew, Trevor, and Willie's daughter, Amy, were working on it. And I remember, like I said, it had been about 20 years ago whenever they first talked to him about it. Actually, Ben had asked Trevor, who was studying to do filmmaking, he said, you ought to make a movie about me. So Trevor actually decided to do that, and I remember Love was so excited. The next time I saw him after it was like okay, we're going to do this, he's like, Love, they're going to make a movie about me. Of course, I thought, how cool is that? And I really hoped then that it would be great, and that one day that, it would all come together, which obviously it has. It's taken a lot longer than I figure anybody anticipated. And as I said, unfortunately, Lovey passed away September 16th of 2017. He was quite a character, and I could sit here and tell stories about him and things that he said and did all day long. But he was always very, very good, very kind, and very good to my kids. He would keep an eye on them if we were at a show and they were there when they were little. He was always had an eye out for them, and just make sure, that they were okay and they were safe. And, if they were running around backstage or whatever, he would definitely keep an eye on them. He came to my house for Christmas one year. That was fun. And he, actually, my son kicked him in the shin. He came in, and my son was about 2 years old at the time, and we were standing there talking, and I looked down and I said, Kason, you remember Lovey, don't you? And he just looked up at him and for some unknown reason hauled off and kicked him as hard as he could right in the shin, on the leg that was hurt from World War II. And of course, Ben winced, and I thought, oh no, he's going to kill my son. I can't say anything to him about it. And he said, boy, your dad's going to whoop your butt. And that was all he said about it. But it was just, that was Ben. He was pretty funny. But you never knew, like, some of the stuff and some of the stories he had told me. I remember one time we were on the bus, and we were watching the old 1958 movie Fall of the House of Usher with Vincent Price in it. So he walked in the door and looked up at the TV, and he goes, Love, is this the Fall of the House of Usher? And we said, yeah, it is. And he goes, I'm in this movie. And we're like, sure you are, Ben. He goes, no, really. Here in a little bit, there'll be two guys carrying a coffin down some stairs with a torch. He goes, I'm the guy on the front of the coffin carrying the torch. Sure enough, it was Ben. And I later found out that he was really good friends with Vincent Price, Rod Serling, all these old actors and such. So, but it was just amazing just to talk to him and hear his stories. He said his favorite memory was getting to dance with Anne Margaret out in Las Vegas one time, which there's actually video of that. I believe that's going to be in the documentary from the little teaser that I saw. So, and he traveled, with working with Willie. He traveled with the Highwaymen when they were on tour. And at one point while they were out on tour, they did a roast to Ben Dorcy. So he had Waylon and Cash and everybody roasting him. He just had some really, really awesome stories, a lot of stories about Johnny Cash, And one of my favorites he told, he said that one night he was driving Cash, and Cash was pretty heavy into pills at that point, and he said they were driving down the road, and every little bit Cash would come to and look over there and say, Ben, give me another pill. And so Ben would shake one out and hand it to him. He said, and then he'd down it with some whiskey and pass out. He said, well, finally, he woke up and said that, and Ben said, I looked, and he was out of pills. And I said, John, I hate to tell you this, but you're out of pills. And he said, oh, yeah, don't mess with me, Ben, all this. And started cussing at him and told him, give me another pill. And Lovey said, well, he said, I didn't know what else to do, so I looked down at my shirt, and I thought about it. So he said, I just pulled a button off my shirt and said, here you go, John. And he said John was sitting over there, said he'd chew them up. So he's over there chewing on it, and I thought, oh, no, he's for sure gonna realize that that's not a pill. But said then he washed it down with some whiskey and passed out again. He said by the time we got to the hotel and I went to check in, he said I didn't have a single button left on my shirt. And I walked in the hotel and said, yes, I'm here to check Mr. Cash into his rooms. And said the hotel attendant looked at him and goes, what, does Mr. Cash not pay his men well enough to have shirts with buttons on them? And he said, I told him, I just mind your own business. But anyhow, he was something else. He was a true treasure. And like I said, the very first roadie, actually. I feel very fortunate that I got to spend all the time that I did with him, and that, I got to call him my friend. And he was always good to me, good to my family, good to my parents. He was just a good guy. He was good. I can't say enough about him. Like I said, he was quirky, and there's probably a lot of people that didn't think he was that great of a guy. But like I said, I understood him, and I got along with him. After he passed away, it was really endearing to me to realize that I had given him he smoked a pipe, and I'd given him a little meerschaum pipe that was carved like an old man's head in a little case one time. And after he had passed away, I got a phone call or a message saying that they had found that pipe amongst his stuff with a little note in it saying that, he had gotten it from me. And he never did smoke it, but he put it away and kept it all those years. And so it was just meaningful to me. And I miss him every day. And just about at least once a day, I think of something he said or something he did. He just always little things trigger memories of Ben. If you got to meet him, consider yourself fortunate, and he was a great guy. But I'm really looking forward to seeing this documentary. I don't know after the premiere what platforms it may be streaming on or anything like that, but I'm very excited about it, and I highly recommend you watch it if you're interested in music history and characters in the music business. He was very, very well known, very famous amongst musicians and artists and within the music business. Not so much outside of the music business, but he was definitely an important part of a lot of artists, entertainers, actors. He was there, Waylon wrote a song about him called Ode to Ben, and he, in there he talks about how it seemed like that there was more than one Ben Dorcy. And, Waylon even also said, he goes, it didn't matter if you needed a cheeseburger on the dark side of the moon, Ben would find it and bring it to you. Anyhow, that'll conclude this video for today, and I can assure you we'll talk more about Ben in the future. He's just a big subject, and like I said, I have so many stories about him. I thank y'all so much for watching. I thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, all those wonderful things. And if you haven't, be sure to click that button down here. Subscribe, it's free. And if you click the little bell icon, anytime I post new content, you will get a notification. Also, if you need any studio work done, if you need some fiddle parts, you need some violin parts or mandolin or anything like that, let me know. I'd love to lay down some tracks for you. And I also do lessons. If you're interested in violin or fiddle lessons, I'd love to work with you on that as well. We can do them remotely and make it easy, work around your schedule. Anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and keep on picking.